about my fifth job, where I worked on the grounds crew at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. I love to say that I was working the graveyard shift over there, which is usually something you say when you work an overnight shift, but it's really funny if you actually work in a graveyard. You don't have to laugh, it's okay, but that's totally a joke that a dad would make. Anyway, the year was 1992. I was still 18 years old going into this job, and I only had a couple months of summer left before college started again. But a business needs workers, and I still needed money, so there we were. Now, Crown Hill is a large and popular final resting place for famous people from Indianapolis, as well as hundreds of other less well-known residents of the city and the state. It is located along 38th Street and Martin Luther King Boulevard, close to the Art Museum, the Children's Museum, Butler University, Marian University, and the Woodstock Country Club, if that means anything to anyone. It spanned over 550 acres when I worked there. It might be a little larger now, I'm not sure. The grave of former President Benjamin Harrison is there. The tomb of Indiana poet James Whitcomb Riley sits at the highest point of the cemetery, which may also be the highest geographical point in Indianapolis. Popular writers Kurt Vonnegut and Booth Tarkington's family plots are there, including one for the Wild Hacks, part of Tarkington's family and the last name of a prominent character in one of Vonnegut's books, Slaughterhouse-Five, I think. I was so surprised to learn that the name Wild Hack was an actual name and not just something that Vonnegut made up, so he probably knew some wild hacks. John Dillinger has a headstone there, and so does your Grampy Jay Thompson, who was fascinated by Dillinger for other reasons in regard to legendary stories involving Greencastle and your ancestors. But we'll save that for another series. I chose that job because it was suggested for me by a colleague of my dad's who also worked at the Indiana State Office Building in downtown Indianapolis. Apparently, this colleague's son had worked there for a couple summers during his college days. I did meet him, but I forget his name. Maybe it was Sean. And we did not work on the same crew. He seemed cool, though. The grounds department at Crown Hill had a large mowing crew, a large trimming crew, and several smaller crews. I was part of one small group that raised and leveled tombstones that had fallen out of alignment over the years. Our crew leader was named Andy. He was in his mid-20s and was working on a nursing degree at either Ivy Tech or IUPUI. I worked with a few other kids whose names might have been Jamie, Doug, and Alan. At least two of them were high school students that probably went to Chittard or Cathedral. I can't remember which one. Maybe both. I met one guy named Bill, who was a soccer player at Mount St. Mary's College in Maryland. His dad was a podiatrist, and they lived on the east side near 56th and Shadeland. I ended up hanging out with him a lot over a couple summers. This place, Crown Hill, was full of colorful characters. From the boss named Dooley and his assistant, whose name I think was Sheila, to the other full-time crew members on internment, excavation, irrigation, maintenance, and mechanics. There was a Gary, a Chris, a Sam, an older guy with thick red suspenders, a short lady with spiky blonde hair, and a tall, thin guy with an 80s Trans Am. Honestly, this job could be its own series, and I think every college guy who rolled through there swore they were going to write a book about that place and make some sort of fortune on its popularity. I wonder if anyone ever actually did that. The actual work, however, was pretty easy, and we spent a lot of time looking for shady, out-of-the-way spots to just hang out and not work. My crewmates and I thought that was a pretty crazy way to organize a workday, but what did we know? We were just high school or college kids who did what the crew leaders told us. We would go to a section of the cemetery, identify which stones needed to be raised or realigned, and gently apply leverage for the adjustment and add gravel and sand and such to secure that ground around the stones. It allowed for plenty of time to read names and dates, like Vonnegut, Tarkington, Wildhack, etc. We would also listen to the radio and do a lot of talking. Doug was in the high school band, and we used to talk about playing music because I was still playing trumpet at the time. Jamie, or this kid who I remember as Jamie, used to try to tell shocking stories about him and his mysterious public school girlfriend, whom Doug had doubts about her existence even. A few weeks into that job that summer, there was a big storm that blew through Indianapolis. It knocked down a lot of limbs in the cemetery and did a fair amount of minor damage to several monuments. We spent the rest of that season just clearing limbs and feeding them into the chipper. Eventually, we picked up an adult crew member named Thomas. He seemed mysterious and dangerous to Doug and me as we worked with him behind the chipper. I can't recall many details, but he was probably on a work release program. There was a lot of that at Crown Hill. And I seem to recall he was a fan of Marvin Gaye, or maybe quoted a Marvin Gaye song once, maybe even told a joke. I don't know. But I associate those two things, those two guys. I think he talked about shooting pool a lot and had several tattoos, which was unusual at the time. He seemed to have a lot of stories that took place in bars. Constantly working behind the chipper got a little rough on the sinuses after a few days and the few weeks that followed. But overall, we all had a good time working together. I left that job because I returned to college in August, but planned to return to work there the following summer, which I did. Crown Hill does still exist today, and I assume they still maintain a full-time and seasonal workforce. Maybe I should drive the kids over there and do some investigating. So that was job number 5. Job number 6 would be the college cafeteria year 2, which I already covered as a package deal with year 1. So the next video will be about my 7th job between my sophomore and junior years of college, which will be Crown Hill again. I suppose this video has a sequel. I can't wait. Thanks for watching.